Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 390 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. My plans for a gentle stroll into spring were thrown off track this week when I received a call telling me one of my colonies had swarmed. It was just the 2nd of April, too late for an April Fool's joke, and so my season begins. Listen in for the full story and my surprise at feeling my first new season sting. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. Hi everyone, welcome back to my podcast, and what a week. Actually, I'm currently sat on my sofa typing away on my iPad. Yes folks, I still write a script for each week, and if I didn't, there would be a long series of ums and ahs as I stumble off topic for 15 or 20 minutes, and you really don't want that. Outside right now, it's 2 a.m. by the way. It sounds like gale force winds. I do hope that you've all survived the night. I, for one, will be heading out to the apiaries and my allotment later to check for damage. I know I have a couple of polynukes that don't have straps or bricks on top of them, so who knows where those roofs will be. Probably blown into the next county, no doubt. They don't have straps because it was all a little bit frantic and urgent, and I'll come on to that in a short while. Oh, happy Easter Sunday to you all. I'm off to the cinema with my grandchildren later to watch Mario and Luigi. So whatever you're up to, I hope you have a restful and fun day. Just turning back to the weather, we've actually had some quite pleasant weather this past week. It feels like we're moving into that spring period of the beekeeping season, which means starting to check colonies with the first quick inspections of the year. These, for me, are very much looking at food stores and whether each colony has a laying queen, a state that we term a queen-right colony. These inspections can be quite a quick look into the hive or nuke box, or actually, they can become a longer, drawn-out, messy affair. The former being a simple task of opening up the hive or nuke, lifting out the first frame, checking for stores, moving across into the next frame and seeing eggs, maybe the queen, and brood in all stages. That's larvae in all stages of development. The latter being a far more awkward affair. This is particularly true for nukes, I find, where overwintered colonies have developed early and are basically running out of space before you get to the first inspection. This means a box full of bees and comb being built in every possible location as they get out early to forage, and the queen lays eggs in any space possible. My initial inspections last week covered pretty much every variation on the scale of easy to downright tricky. Full-size hives, I find, are far easier to check. Having more room in the brood box, colonies are rarely, in my experience, so large that they gum up everything with brace comb to the point of making it difficult to lift out at least one frame without ripping huge chunks of comb away because they've stuck it to the sidewall. Very often, I'll leave that first frame in place and take out the second frame instead. This makes the whole inspection process a little less messy. It's not always that easy with nukes, I find. My week started well enough. I was over at the Fishing Lakes apiaries. The bracecomb colony that I shot a video of a short while ago was actually the main target of my focus there. I wanted to update everyone following on from the addition of that second brood box in the last week of March or thereabouts. This colony has grown so well and developed a large number of frames within that second brood box. For those of you who haven't seen the video, I discovered they had a large section of comb built beneath the coverboard in the space that a super, being used as an eek, had given them. But at that point, they were actually starving, so I gave them a bag of fondant. Fast forward, and they had benefited from a spring flush of nectar and pollen from predominantly willow trees, and not only started filling this comb with stores, but the queen had been up there and laid eggs in a large section of it. Now, I didn't want to destroy this valuable brood, so I simply added another brood box full of frames with foundation and replaced the super, complete with what I would call wild comb, or burr comb as it's sometimes referred to, back on top. I left them for a week or so, and I wanted to check in on them to see how far they had managed to draw out that foundation and see if I could pop in a queen excluder to separate the queen from that super. My intention being to allow the brood to emerge before removing that comb in the super and replacing it with frames to make my life a little easier. Well, they hadn't disappointed. The vast majority of frames had been drawn, eggs and larvae were in several of the frames, and as luck would have it, the queen was also on one of those frames. This made my task so much easier, as I could simply slip the queen excluder in between the top of the second brood box and the super above that with the comb in. There was some drone brood in there mixed in with the worker brood, so I will have to leave them a little longer to emerge. Remember, drones take 24 days to emerge from the point of an egg being laid, whereas workers take 21 days. By the end of the month, that's April, I'll be able to remove it, and actually by then it will probably be full of capped honey. Lucky me. Following on from that inspection, although it was a straightforward inspection compared to many, it wasn't at all problematic. I headed over to the farm apiary to swap out the brood box on a colony that had been the subject of a woodpecker attack and had a hole in the side of the box. I thought I'd recorded a full explanatory video for everyone, but I had, at some point, forgotten to press the record button on the camera. My apologies to everyone for that, and a note to myself to remember to check next time. That particular colony had also grown very nicely, despite the damage to the brood box, and were so large that I added a second brood box to them as well. The main reason for this being a bright yellow field of oilseed rape a short distance away. Part of my strategy for managing spring growth is adding a second box, allowing me to swap out old for new frames of comb, or in some cases split the colony into either one complete box of bees ready for a new queen, or using a queen cell produced by that colony. The other option is to split it down further into as many nukes as I feel they can easily cope with. These then getting either a queen cell or a new season queen in due course. But that's all still a fair way off in the future. It was just the end of March when this was all happening after all, still very early in the season. Actually, there were several colonies here that I added a second box to. Overwintered colonies in polyhives have always outperformed the more traditional wooden hives in my experience. That can bring its own set of issues and challenges, the woodpecker being an example of that, but overall I find the benefits far outweigh the challenges. I actually added a brood box to 8 colonies here, larger brood nests and the proximity of that nectar flow being the main drivers. Also, the need to get new comb drawn for spring splits later in the month. So that was midweek. It won't be lost on some of you that the middle of the week was April Fool's Day. Here, my week began to take a turn towards a more comical and urgent need to get as many inspections completed as possible. Thursday of last week was a very pleasant day at the workshop. Joe and I took to the paintbrushes and started painting the Langstroth polynukes that needed building. This is now becoming urgent. The ends of the Paradise Honey nuke boxes have protective plastic sleeves that fit top and bottom, and I wanted to paint the poly material first so that these strips didn't get covered in paint too. I actually discovered we were missing 4 ends from the delivery. There should have been 60, but despite several checks and miscounts by both of us, we each came to the conclusion that we were missing them. A quick call to Simon the beekeeper and the missing parts were dispatched without fuss. It's so nice to be able to have that kind of response from a supplier. So thank you to the team at Simon the Beekeeper. Actually, the missing parts arrived on Saturday morning, just as promised. We finished up painting all of the ends that we had. Joe headed off home, and I decided that after a successful day at the workshop, I would pop up to my allotment to water a few of the young plants that I'd recently transplanted into beds and give myself some thinking space. 20 minutes into that relaxing stroll around the allotment, and I received a phone call from an allotment holder at the Hillside Allotment Apiary to tell me that there was a swarm of my bees on the side of a compost bin, and could I pop up and see what I could do. I think my first reaction was disbelief. After all, I'm in full control of my bees. It's barely April, and my bees can't possibly be swarming. If it had been later in the season, I would have put money on them being bumblebees of some type, but right now it's just far too early for large numbers of bumblebees to be around, so it had to be the honeybees. Luckily, I'd loaded up the truck with spare nuke boxes and hives to take over to other apiary sites. All of my inspection gear was on the truck, so I put away the watering can and drove over to the allotment apiary, a short 15-minute drive from my home. Sure enough, there was a not insignificant cluster of bees on the front of an open compost heap, clinging to a tangle of dead sticks and stems from the previous year's crops, no doubt. It was quite late in the day by now, and with the sun starting to set, the air temperature was starting to fall rapidly. Now this is significant because the cluster of bees is going to be far less willing to move in that colder early evening air than if it had been mid-afternoon and still being warmed by the heat of the sun. Sometimes you just get lucky. What's that expression? The more I practice, the luckier I get. It's a famous quote from golfer Gary Player. Famous quote if you follow golf, I guess. Anyway, the top of the compost heap was fairly flat, the perfect place to pop a brood box filled with frames of foundation. Knowing that the bees are going to be reluctant to move, given the cooler weather conditions, meant a little encouragement was required. I lit the smoker and gently convinced the clustered swarm to move upwards into the brood box. This is easily achieved by smoking the cluster from the bottom, chasing the bees up and into the box. Once a significant number had moved up into the box, that box then goes onto the floor, and then a continual encouragement at the base of the cluster helps get the bees moving more quickly. Once I see bees fanning their Nasonov glands at the entrance, I stop using the smoker and allow the bees to signal to the rest of them to move into the hive. Literally 30 minutes after arriving, the bees were in the hive and I headed home for my dinner. The next morning, I returned early to collect them and move them over to the Fishing Lakes apiary. Time to find out if they were, in fact, my bees. When I returned to the apiary later that morning, the allotment holder of that plot was there, so I presented him with a jar of honey for his troubles and asked about what had happened. He had actually witnessed the swarm happening. He said, rather confusingly, the bees had flown over his head and down to other allotments. He'd been stung, and then, when he looked at the top allotment plot, the bees were swarming along the hedge line and then settled onto the compost heap. It dawned on me that he was actually describing two swarms. Sure enough, upon inspecting the colonies here, two of them had swarmed. Now, before you panic, let me explain. These are polynukes that have overwintered really successfully, but they're still nucleus colonies. They're not full-size hives. In the intervening period between Thursday's race around the apiaries to check on all of the nukes and now, that's 4 a.m. on Easter Sunday as I write this, I've inspected all of the nukes and hives except in one apiary, maybe 15 or so colonies still to check. So 70 or more inspections later, I found that only these two nukes have swarmed, and of the rest, two had viable queen cells. These had an egg just laid in the cell. So my message is very much don't panic, but do be aware that congestion is happening for some of us, and the reports of swarms around the UK are genuine. The challenge is finding that moment of warmer weather to pop into the hives and check on what's going on. Right now, for me, anything over 10 degrees Celsius is enough to have a quick look. But if you're new to beekeeping, I would encourage you to wait 14 to 15 degrees, kind of t-shirt weather. As I said, the vast majority of colonies are perfectly fine right now and will cope with another few days without being bothered. That said, this is beekeeping. Remember, all colonies are different. Your location will be part of the story too. Some snow is forecast right now in parts of the UK, so do be sensible. But the flip side of that is sheltered apiaries in the south and east can easily have 20 degrees Celsius and more this week, and with it an ideal opportunity to carry out that first inspection, or indeed second inspection. I was at the paddock apiary yesterday checking through everything. Here there were 2 nukes with charged queen cells, but of more interest to me was a Langstroth hive that over winter had been relatively small. I had added fondant to them as they'd been light, and this was fed beneath an overturned poly feeder. I wasn't really expecting to find much going on. Of course, the bees will always surprise us, and not only had they grown strongly, but they had literally filled the feeder with comb, brood and food, so much so that there wasn't really anything I could do except add another brood box beneath the feeder and let them get on with it. I couldn't find the queen. She was undoubtedly in the feeder comb. There were no queen cells, so the best thing to do for me is nothing. If I had attempted to remove the comb from the feeder, I risked killing or damaging the queen, and it would have been very messy indeed. Another case of allowing them to do their own thing, get a queen excluder in as soon as possible to trap the queen beneath the feeder, and then remove it once the brood has emerged, maybe full of honey. There's certainly a nectar flow on at the moment. Finally today, that first spring sting. It's always a surprise. It's always my fault, and it always hurts like hell. If you put your hand and fingers down on bees at work, don't be surprised if they fight back. Luckily, I was on my own. The language was colourful, and I look forward to getting my next sting in due course. Well, that's it for this week. For all of you who haven't yet signed up to my Patreon page, I, together with Steph, have been creating beekeeping content for many years now. And if you're looking for some straightforward, down-to-earth tips and techniques, help and advice, then do take a look at my Patreon page. We have over 1,700 individual beekeeping posts, videos and podcasts filled with useful and timely help and advice. My approach is pragmatic and calm, sometimes entertaining, but always with help and support for the beekeepers at the heart of what I do. I keep my videos short and concise wherever possible, no waffle, no flannel, just honest beekeeping advice from years of keeping bees. Take a look and join me for the new 2026 beekeeping season. It'll cost you less than a jar of honey, and you never know, there may be something there that will help improve your beekeeping. Check us out online at www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey.